I didn't move at first. I just stood in the hallway, holding a folder of documents that, only this morning, had felt like a step towards stability. The house was quiet, that thick living kind of quiet that only happens in the afternoon, when the light hits at an angle and the air smells like fresh wood. I took a step toward the kitchen, and that's when I heard her voice. Not laughter, not irritation, something else. Controlled, measured, careful, as if she were speaking not from our home, but from a stranger's room, trying not to wake someone who could ruin everything. I froze by the doorway. The phone was on speaker. I recognized the muted tone of her boss. Martin. He had that kind of voice people use when giving instructions to those they don't respect. And he sounded far too relaxed for a work conversation. "He won't notice anything," Lisa said quietly, almost in a whisper. "He doesn't even understand what he's signing." I felt something drop inside me, like the air in my chest suddenly thickened. I wasn't angry. I didn't even get the chance. It was as if the world had become 4 degrees colder. "You sure he'll even ask?" Martin chuckled. Lisa exhaled, sounding as if this conversation was familiar to her, almost routine. "He just wants peace. He thinks that if he sorts out the finances, I'll go back to normal. It's easier that way. He always takes on more than he should." Her words sounded like she wasn't describing a husband, but a piece of furniture, something that does its job until someone decides to replace it. I didn't move. I didn't want to disturb the shadow I was standing in. I wanted to hear every detail so I wouldn't have to guess. Eavesdropping is unpleasant, but sometimes people reveal the truth themselves when they think you're not watching. "The important thing is that he doesn't start digging into the accounts," Martin added. "We need time. You're sure he won't notice the movement?" "He never looks there," she said. "He trusts me." That's the problem and the solution at the same time. Another brief silence. A rustle of papers. The tap of her ring against the table. I knew that sound. She was nervous, which meant this was more serious than I thought. "First the transfer, then the conversation," she said. "I want everything to be clean. I want to leave calmly." Martin snorted. "Calmly? You're too soft." She didn't answer, and that silence was louder than anything she had said. I stepped back a couple of steps so the floorboards wouldn't creak and walked into the living room. The papers in my hand suddenly felt heavy. The moment I walked out of the notary's office felt so far away it might as well have happened to someone else. I even remembered how light the sky looked. Funny how little it takes for that sky to turn to lead. When Lisa walked out of her office, I was sitting on the couch, like I had been there all along. Her face changed instantly, like someone switched off a light inside her. "Oh, you're home?" she asked, smiling stiffly, almost like a reporter. "You're early." "Yeah," I said. It went faster than I expected. She placed her phone on the table face down. A small detail, but I always noticed those things. She did that when she didn't want anyone to see her notifications. "How did it go at the notary?" she asked, walking past me and kissing my temple. "Good." "Good," I said calmly. "I signed everything. All the documents are ready." Her shoulders loosened, barely, but I caught it, only because I was watching. She walked to the cabinet, poured herself water, and I heard the glass tremble in her hand. "I thought it would take longer," she said. "You know how nervous I get about paperwork. I just want everything to be right." "Right," I repeated, feeling that word carve itself into me like something sharp. "Yes, you always want things right." She gave a small smile, but her eyes were unfocused, as if there was a hollow space running between us. We talked about dinner, work, some trivial things, but her eyes kept darting toward the phone. And the more she tried to act calm, the clearer it became. She was already somewhere else entirely. When she went to shower, I opened my laptop, not to spy, but to look at what had never interested me before. Transactions, timelines, filing dates. And for the first time, I noticed that in recent weeks, Lisa hadn't just been distant. She had been organized. Too organized. Excessively careful about things she had always been careless with. I closed the laptop and sat down. Sat the way a person sits when they need to accept something enormous, before anyone sees their face. I didn't know all the details, but I knew one thing. The moment I walked into the house, my life had already been half rewritten. And not by me. And this was only the beginning. But that was just the beginning. The next morning felt off in a way I couldn't name. Not dramatic, not loud. More like when a room looks exactly the same, but the air is different, and you can't explain why your chest feels tight. Liza moved around the kitchen with a softness that almost felt rehearsed. Careful footsteps, a sweeter tone, an extra second of eye contact. People think guilt makes someone act jittery. Sometimes it makes them act perfect. She placed a cup of coffee beside me like it was an apology wrapped in ceramic. "Rough day today?" she asked lightly. "Not rough," I answered. "Just thinking." She froze for half a second. Barely. But enough that I noticed. Too still. Too aware. "About the documents?" she pressed. "Among other things." She nodded too quickly, then grabbed her bag as if the room was suddenly too warm. "I'll see you tonight. Don't work too late." Her words were soft, but there was something underneath them, a tension she didn't know how to hide, the kind of tension someone has when they don't know how much you know. When the door clicked shut, the house felt larger, emptier. I opened my laptop again, not because I wanted to dig, but because I suddenly couldn't ignore the numbers anymore. Bank records I never cared about. Account histories I always assumed were stable. I didn't even know the exact date she'd switched her direct deposit into her personal account. Quietly, no discussion, just done. I scrolled through line after line, each one a breadcrumb leading somewhere I didn't want to go. Transfers labeled temporary. Charges that didn't look like her. Or maybe they did, and I just hadn't been paying attention. I leaned back, exhaling sharply. I wasn't angry yet. I was calibrated, feeling each detail click into place the way a drawer finally shuts after catching on something for months. But the strangest part? The more I looked, the more it felt like she'd planned the next steps, long before I ever stepped foot in the notary's office. Around noon, while I was at the workshop cutting a plank for a custom shelf, she texted, "Having a busy day? Love you. Love you." She hadn't said that without prompting in weeks. Dan glanced at my phone, buzzing on the bench, and raised an eyebrow. "Everything good at home?" "Depends what you call good," I muttered, sweeping sawdust into piles. He didn't pry, he never pried. But he watched me longer than usual, like he'd seen the look on my face on other men before. A few hours later, Liza showed up at the shop unannounced. That wasn't normal. She stepped inside, wearing that practiced half-smile women use when they want to look calm but haven't slept. She held a bag of takeout. "Thought you'd probably skip lunch," she said lightly, setting the food down like she was placing a peace offering at the door of a kingdom she'd betrayed. "You didn't have to," I answered. "I wanted to," she said too fast. Dan caught the moment, gave me that quiet nod men give when they know the room isn't theirs, and stepped outside. She hovered near me while I opened the bag. Turkey sandwich. My usual. Mine, not hers. The kind she buys when she's trying to be thoughtful. "You've been quiet lately," she said, leaning against the workbench. "Everything okay?" I looked at her, really looked. The careful makeup, the steady breathing, the way her fingers tapped the wood behind her. Subtle, rhythmic, like she was trying to bleed out nerves. "Just thinking," I said again. She swallowed. "About us?" The pause was too heavy for a kitchen conversation, too heavy for a workshop, too heavy for people who were supposed to be fine. "About everything," I answered. Her eyes flicked away. She wasn't good at holding eye contact when she had something to hide. "Maybe we could do dinner Friday," she said quickly. "Just us. No phones. You pick the place." A few months ago, that offer would have made me grateful. Now it felt like a strategy session disguised as romance. "Sure," I said. "Friday's fine." Her shoulders dropped in relief, so visible it almost hurt to watch. She stayed a little longer, asking about work. pretending to be interested in lumber types and project deadlines, the things she usually skimmed over. Then she kissed my cheek and left with that polished smile, like she was checking off a step in a quiet plan. After she left, Dan returned, wiping his hands on a rag. "So, lunch delivery now? That new?" "Apparently," he studied me. "People only start bringing food when something's wrong." I didn't answer, but he understood. That night, Liza was unusually affectionate, asking about my day, sitting closer than usual. Little touches, hand on my arm, shoulder brushing mine, the gentle press of her knee against me on the couch. All the small gestures she had been withholding for weeks suddenly came rushing back like someone had flipped a switch. But it didn't feel warm. It felt curated. She laughed too loudly at a joke I barely made, leaned in too often, checked her phone too many times, and then immediately flipped it face down when she realized she'd done it. And I kept watching. She wasn't acting like a woman in love. She was acting like a woman who was afraid something had slipped. Before bed, I went back to the documents I'd signed earlier that day. Everything was technically correct. All legal, all clean. But in the middle pages, the ones most people skim over, were clauses that could be twisted. Clauses she had insisted we include to protect each other. But they protected only one person. I sat in the dark at the edge of the bed, long after she fell asleep. Her breathing was steady, soft, peaceful, like someone who believed she still had control over the board. And maybe she did. Maybe she had for months. But as I watched the rise and fall of her back, something settled in my chest. Something quiet, decisive, final. That night, I stopped being the hero. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't shake her awake and demand explanations she'd already rehearsed. I simply understood that whatever world she thought she was building, I was no longer standing where she expected. She wanted me distracted. She wanted me trusting. She wanted me blind. But I wasn't blind anymore, and that changed everything. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. By the next morning, something in me had settled. Not peace, clarity. The kind of clarity a man gets when he stops trying to protect someone who's already chosen to stand on the other side of the fire. Liza moved around the house, acting gentler than usual, but I could see the stiffness in her shoulders, the nervous glances she kept throwing at her phone, the way her smile trembled at the edges, like it was barely holding its shape. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid I'd noticed something, and that fear made her predictable. At work, between measurements and sawdust, I opened a private folder I hadn't used in years. Receipts, bank statements, old agreements. I scanned each document with fresh eyes, not the trusting eyes of a husband, but the steady gaze of a man who has finally understood his position in the story. There were moves she had already made, subtle ones. A second savings account, a credit card I didn't know she opened, a small but consistent series of withdrawals, labeled work expenses that didn't match her job. When I cross-checked dates, patterns emerged. The same days she'd stayed late at the office, lined up with nights she'd moved money. Amounts small enough to avoid suspicion, but steady enough to form a tunnel under our finances. Not enough to drain me, enough to destabilize me. And the most interesting part, every withdrawal corresponded with a deposit into an account under her maiden name. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is noise, and I needed silence. At lunch, I sat in my truck and listened to a voicemail I hadn't noticed the night before, the one she left her boss after she thought I'd fallen asleep. Her voice was shaky, low, a blend of frustration and fear. "He's been acting strange," she whispered. "I think he suspects something." A pause, breathing, a small tremor in her voice. "No, he didn't say anything, but he looked at the papers too long. I don't know if we should wait." Another pause. Then the boss's voice, calm, confident, careless. "He's not the type to fight. He'll freeze. Just keep things normal until the transfer." Normal. Until the transfer. I ended the voicemail and sat in silence, hands on the steering wheel. I didn't shake. I didn't curse. I didn't punch the dashboard like men in cheap movies do. Instead, I felt something click into place, the last piece of a puzzle that had been building for weeks. They didn't fear my anger. They feared my indifference. Good. I could work with that. Over the next few days, I started making quiet moves of my own. Simple things. Normal things. Things that wouldn't raise suspicion but would put distance between my stability and their plan. Emailing the bank to request separate notifications. Shifting my personal savings into a protected account. Transferring my direct deposit. Printing every record I could find. And storing physical copies in a locked drawer at the workshop. I didn't touch her accounts, didn't spy on her phone, didn't break into anything. I stayed exactly the man she believed she could outmaneuver. Calm, consistent, predictable. The easiest lies to expose are the ones told to someone you think is stupid. By Thursday, the tension in our house was so thick it felt like humidity after a storm. Liza kept talking, filling silence, checking her phone, asking harmless questions that weren't harmless at all. What time will you be home tomorrow? Do you think you'll be working late next week? Did you sign everything at the notary, or is there something left? I answered gently, evenly, and every gentle answer made her more nervous. That night, her boss called while she was cooking dinner. She stepped into the hallway, quietly, but not quietly enough. I pretended to rinse dishes, letting the sound of running water cover the faint rhythm of their conversation. Friday is the safest, he whispered. He'll be at work all morning. You'll have enough time before he notices. I don't like this, she said. He's different lately. You're imagining it. Just stick to the plan. After Friday, you'll be free. Free. I dried my hands, turned off the sink, and walked back to the kitchen like nothing had happened. Liza jolted slightly, then smiled too wide. Everything okay? She asked. Everything's fine, I said, and for the first time it actually was. Friday morning arrived slow and heavy. Liza wore her effortlessly prepared face, but her hands shook slightly as she tied her hair. She kissed my cheek before I left, something she hadn't done in weeks, and her lips were cold. You'll be home at the usual time? She asked lightly. Pretty close, I said. If anything changes, I'll let you know. Her exhale was quiet, but telling. At work, I wrapped up everything early. The guys noticed I wasn't myself, but not in a bad way. I was focused, sharp, efficient. Dan finally asked, You good, man? I answered honestly, I will be. At 11:30 a.m., I drove home, not quietly, not sneaking, not hiding. Just walking into my own house the way any husband would walk into the home he pays for. Liza was standing in the kitchen with papers spread out across the counter like an autopsy. She froze when she saw me. Too sudden, too pale. I thought you'd be at work, she said. I finished early. She opened her mouth, closed it. The papers trembled. And there on the table was the signature line she planned to forge. For a moment she didn't speak. Didn't breathe, didn't blink. Liza, I said quietly, you should sit down. She didn't sit. Her chest rose and fell in short, panicked bursts. Please, she whispered, trembling. Just let me explain. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, she understood something she never expected. I wasn't the man she could control. I wasn't the man she could manipulate. I wasn't the man who would freeze. She thought she'd weakened me. All she'd done was wake me up, and that was her mistake. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. She stood frozen in the kitchen, shoulders shaking, pupils blown wide like someone waking up inside the wrong story. The papers on the counter fluttered slightly from the draft when I closed the door behind me. It felt strange how the smallest sound could break a moment that had been building for months. Liza, I said again, softer this time. Sit down. She didn't. She pressed both palms to the edge of the counter, knuckles white, as if the wood could keep her upright. Her lips opened once, twice, before any sound came out. You weren't supposed to be home. Not an apology, just an admission. Clearly, I said. Her eyes darted to the papers, then to her phone, then to the door, like she was calculating escape routes. People get loud when they're angry, but when they're scared, they get quiet. I wasn't going to do anything, she whispered. Liza, I said calmly, I heard the entire plan. Her knees buckled and she slid into the chair like someone pushed the air out of her. For the first time in a long time, she looked at me, really looked, and I think she finally realized that the man standing across from her wasn't confused, or hurt, or pleading. He was done. I never meant to hurt you, she managed. Intent doesn't change the result. She covered her face with her hands, not crying, not yet, just hiding. Shame is quieter than guilt. It sits in the throat like a stone. When she finally looked up again, she whispered, I can fix this. No, I said gently, you can't. Silence settled between us like dust. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. A message preview lit the screen. Everything ready? She flinched, reached for it, but I moved first, placing my hand lightly on the phone before she could grab it. You won't need to respond, I said. Her breath hitched, a tiny broken sound. I wasn't angry. I wasn't performing. I was simply finished. You don't understand, she whispered. He told me. He made it sound like... You had a choice, I said. She shook her head, but I continued before she could speak. And you made it. Her mouth trembled. Tears gathered finally, not loud ones, not dramatic ones, just quiet, tired water that had nowhere else to go. I thought you wouldn't fight back, she said, voice thin as paper. I didn't, I answered. I just stopped protecting you. That was the truth, and it landed harder than anything I could have yelled. She stood suddenly, knocking the chair legs against the tile. Please don't ruin me, she whispered. You don't have to. Liza, I said, I'm not ruining you. I'm stepping out of the way while you ruin yourself. She didn't take that well. She started pacing, muttering explanations, rushed, tangled, half-truths, bleeding into full lies. I let her talk until her voice cracked, until her hands shook, until she ran out of ways to justify the unjustifiable. Then I spoke. You'll pack your things today. I've already separated the accounts. The bank documents are secured. You won't be accessing anything that belongs to me. She stared like I'd slapped her, but my voice never rose. I won't expose you publicly unless you force my hand. Tell your boss the plan fell through. Or don't. He'll find out when he notices the missing access. Her jaw clenched. You can't do this, she whispered. You said that already, I replied. But I can. And I have. Something in her broke at that. Not dramatic, not loud. Just resignation. She sank back into the chair, shoulders collapsing inward. What am I supposed to do? She asked weakly. Start over, I said. Like I will, but separately. Then came the softest, smallest question. Do you hate me? No, I said, but I don't know you anymore, and you don't know me. She cried then, quietly, like someone trying not to inconvenience the room. I didn't reach for her. I didn't comfort her. That part of us was already gone. Within an hour she was packing. She moved slowly, touching things like they were relics from a life she barely remembered. Clothes, shoes, a few framed pictures she tucked away face down. I stayed in the living room, giving her space. Not punishment, distance. When she finally wheeled her suitcase to the door, she paused. Where will you go? She whispered. Nowhere, I said. This is my home. That landed. Hard. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and walked out. The wheels of her suitcase thumped twice on the concrete. The same sound I heard in my head the night everything shifted. When the door clicked shut behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt accurate. Later that evening, I sent a brief email to her boss. Factual, unemotional, clean. Letting him know his involvement was documented and would be forwarded to HR if he contacted me or attempted further coordination with Liza through shared accounts. It wasn't revenge, it was boundary. It only took an hour for consequences to reach him. He started calling her, then stopped. HR emails have a way of doing that. By Monday, he was on leave. By Wednesday, under investigation. By Friday, gone. Their plan collapsed like it had been built on wet cardboard. Liza moved into a small rental across town. Mutual friends said she'd lost weight, looked tired, talked less. I didn't ask for updates. The past is not a place I visit. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't explode outward. It settled inward. Quiet mornings, clean counters, my tools exactly where I left them, coffee that tasted like something again. The air in the house felt breathable. Peace isn't a feeling. It's an environment. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table, I realized the strangest thing. I wasn't angry anymore. Not even sad. Just steady. The kind of steady a man feels when he finally puts the world back into his own hands. I looked at the empty chair across from me, not with longing, not with regret, just recognition. Some endings aren't tragedies. They're exits. And mine came right on time.